Today I'm going to share with you a tool that'll help you get higher grades, do better in job interviews, punch up your speeches, and inspire your writing. I'm going to show you how to build a 21st century version of the swipe file. I'm going to show you how to build it. I'm going to show you how to use it. The best part about this is that most people don't know how to use it and have never even heard of it, so it's going to give you a real advantage. Let's get into it. Hi, I'm Ashley, the MBA Coach. On this channel, we're dedicated to making videos that'll help you get the most out of the time and the money that you're spending on your MBA. Bottom line, we're here to help make you more in demand. So today I'm going to talk to you about, first off, what people do today. I'm going to talk to you about what a swipe file is. I'm going to talk to you about how to build one, and then finally how to use it effectively. So what do people do today? You've probably had the same experience I have, where you're reading something or you hear something and you think, man, that is really interesting, insightful, thoughtful. I want to remember that. I want to use that later. What happens? Like most of us, it disappears like smoke in the wind because you didn't capture it. So that's part of what we're going to be thinking about when it comes to swipe files. So what is a swipe file? The one I'm going to describe to you is derived from two places. First off is what's called a commonplace book. It was made more famous. I don't know if it's famous or not, but it was made more famous by such authors as Ryan Holiday, who wrote The Obstacle is the Way, and Robert Greene, who wrote Mastery. And both of them have written many other books. I'd encourage you to read their books. They're really great authors. That's one part of it, the commonplace book. The second part is the old legacy swipe files that advertising agencies and advertising execs used to use. So really creative people. What they would do is they would have a physical folder and they would tear out of magazines, add copy or ideas or color palettes or whatever it was that really inspired them. They thought, wow, that's really amazing. And they built this folder, they tore magazine pages out, put it in the folder, and when they were going to do their creative work, they'd open it and they'd look for inspiration in it. They wouldn't copy it. That's not the purpose of this. The purpose of it for them was to use inspiration. What we're going to do is we're going to build a digital version of it, a version where you can access it easily on your phone. It's on your computer, of course, easily accessible to you. So let's talk about how to build it now. I like to use a tool called Notion. If you've watched other of my videos, you'll know I'm a big fan of Notion. It's a great app. It's a very powerful tool that will really help you in multiple different ways. For the purposes of the swipe file, it's actually pretty simple. What we're going to do is we're going to build an inline database, basically. So you go into Notion, you create a new inline database. There's going to be 5 columns. The first column is what is this item you want to remember. The second is some sort of categorization, so you can filter by that. That'll help you find the stuff you're looking for, find the inspiration, find the quotes, find the ideas, whatever. The next one is the date. When did you get it? This I find is just kind of useful for keeping track of the source of where I get stuff. And the last 2 columns are precisely that, the source. And then in some cases, I'll also put the source URL if it came digitally. So that's kind of the mechanics of what it looks like. Let's talk about how to build one. When you're reading a book, and I encourage you, read extensively. You've heard me talk about this before. The best way to be creative, the best way to become inspired is to read a lot, be exposed to plenty of different ideas. So you're reading, you're going along, and you notice something, and you think, wow, that's actually a pretty interesting anecdote or an interesting story or an interesting idea, something that sparks your interest. Annotate that part of the text, make a note beside it, and continue reading and go through that process. I like the way Ryan Holiday does it, so this is something else I pulled from his approach. What he'll do then is he will set that book aside. Once he finishes, he's annotated that text, he's interacted with it, he's thought about it. What he'll do is he'll set that book aside and let things kind of simmer and percolate and digest in his mind. A couple of weeks later, he'll come back and capture that. So what he'll do is he'll take those anecdotes, take those ideas, and put them into his digital swipe file. The way I like to do it, the way that what's worked for me so far pretty effectively, is I'll sort of mark a certain part of the text, and then I'll put an S beside it to remind myself, this is something I think I want to put in my swipe file. I think it's really important to mention too here, the goal here is not perfection. There are going to be things that you want to capture that you don't capture. There are times when I've kind of like fallen off the wagon a little bit and not added and continued adding to my swipe file. What makes this so powerful is that you can come back to it. The goal isn't perfection, as I said. So let's say you don't really add to it for a couple of months or whatever. You can come back to it and you have this existing file of information, of ideas, but you can keep adding to it when you start reading more aggressively again. Maybe you go through a period of time where you're busy and you don't have a lot of time to read. And now then you have more opportunity to build your knowledge, start reading again, and then you can keep adding to it. What's amazing about this is it's applicable in a lot of different ways. I'm going to run through some examples, But what's amazing about it is it's applicable throughout your career. So you can be in grade 9, the beginning of high school or middle school, whatever that is in your area, and start building this swipe file, and its value will continue to grow. There's not a lot of tools that we can build that are quite like that. So I guess what I'm telling you here is don't make this a stressful tool. Make it a valuable tool that when you go through a season of not doing too much, you can come back to it and it still works effectively for you. So now let's move on to talking about how to use a swipe file, how to apply it. One of the things I really like doing and including in my swipe file, beyond ideas and insightful thoughts I come across, insightful things I read, is grabbing quotes. I find it so helpful because I like to incorporate powerful and effective quotes into writing, into speeches, into stuff like presentations, things like that. So let's go through an example right now. So in writing, you incorporate quotes because they give more potency to your argument. You're pulling in a third party to support your argument and you're providing social proof. So how could you do this? Let's say, for example, you put in your swipe file Winston Churchill's famous speech or a reference to it about how we will fight on the beaches, that famous "we will fight on the beaches" speech. You could use that in a essay that you were writing or a paper you were writing about a company needing to do a really difficult transformation, a business transformation, where they were going to have to really stick to it. Or you could use it in a paper about a deeply competitive environment, and you recognize the incredible tenacity of one of the companies. That's one of the ways you could use it. Of course, this is something that was used in a speech. You could use that in a speech as well if you were trying to inspire people. Another example would be a story that Lincoln told. This isn't a quote, but it's a story. I think bringing these in as well. Lincoln once told a story where he asked a group of people, if you were to have a dog that had 4 legs and we called the tail a leg as well, how many legs would the dog have? And people, thought about it and they said, well, I guess he would have 5 legs. And he said, no, it would only have 4 legs. The fact that we call a tail a leg does not make it a leg. What you can do with this story is incorporate it into a paper or a speech about fake news in the media. Just because we call something doesn't make it true. And there's a lot of other different applications for it, but that's one of the things you want to be thinking about is pulling in quotes, pulling in stories into your swipe file that you can deploy in a lot of different ways. Another example of how to use it can be in job interviews. So a Yale prof, Amy Wisniewski, hopefully I'm pronouncing her name correctly, has written a lot about job crafting and about satisfaction derived from people's jobs. In fact, there was a paper that she published, or she did some work around this, where they interviewed janitors and custodial staff at hospitals. And they basically came out in 2 groups, as it turns out. One group viewed it as, this is what I do, this is my job, I'm here basically exchanging my services for money in a way that makes sense for both of us, which is fair enough. The second group was really interesting. They viewed their job differently and got much higher satisfaction from it. They viewed themselves as an important part of the team to help the patients get better. Cleanliness was a critical factor, a germ-free environment, and they viewed that as important, and that helped them do a better job. They also would go and circle back to the rooms where patients weren't getting a lot of visitors to give them more human contact. So what this basically talks about is this notion of how we look at our job can have a big impact. If you're in an interview for a very demanding job, one of the things you can talk about is how you'll get job satisfaction from the work itself and from the outputs of it and the outcomes of it beyond just the monetary factors. Companies really care about how long people will stay and will they stick around in tough jobs. If you can demonstrate to them that you care about this job beyond just the money, that's a real mark in your favor, and it can help you on the margin if that's one of the differences when it comes down to selecting someone. Marketing class is, of course, laden with opportunities to use material from a swipe file. One of the examples that you could use, there's a story from Nora Ephron, who was involved with the movie When Harry Met Sally. She tells a story about how back in high school journalism class, the prof started out by saying, okay, I want you to write the lead for this story. And here are the facts. The teachers are going to be doing an offsite training next Thursday. This is the material that's going to be covered. This is how long it's going to be, blah, blah, blah. Students, went to it and started writing the lead. What's the headline for that story? They came back and told a variety of very fact and detail based headlines. The teacher said, absolutely not, you've all got it wrong. The lead of the story is, there's no school next Thursday. And that, of course, was this big revelatory moment for people. But when you take that story, you can incorporate it into all sorts of things related to marketing. And how, maybe even you sort of bringing back Stephen Covey's famous line of the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. So There's a lot of opportunities. So that's just one example out of many you could use. But again, when you pull these examples in, what you're doing is you're enhancing your credibility by using social proof, by borrowing credibility from other people. And in some ways, that's one of the main benefits of a swipe file, of being able to bring these quotations, these ideas into it. But also the idea of being inspired by it. When you're looking for ideas, scrolling through your swipe file, all the examples I've used are all in my swipe file, which made this video a lot easier to make because I had these examples at the ready. So another couple of examples maybe for job interviewing. Warren Buffett had a famous line, and this is finance specific, right? So if you're looking for a finance job, Buffett used the phrase, "I'm happy to pay a fair price for a great business, but I'm not interested in paying a cheap price for a lousy business." It's kind of that idea of how he approaches investing. If that aligns, if that's how you think, if that aligns with how you think, it's a useful way to incorporate it because everyone can kind of understand that. Another example might be Howard Marks used the phrase only a couple of years ago that capitalism without bankruptcy is a little bit like Catholicism without hell. It's one of those funny, pithy lines that you can bring into an interview, and it shows that you're well read, and it can help illustrate and articulate your point and provide a good support for what you're saying. Again, as I mentioned, there's so many ways to apply this and use these tools. So let's say you're asked to give an impromptu going away speech for a colleague who's been with the firm for a long time and you know them well or whatever. And what you can do is pull John Kennedy's speech where he talked about ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country, and use that to articulate how that person was so selfless and so giving. You can use that in the context of talking about servant leadership and of talking about someone who was so generous and giving, who thought of others and not for themselves immediately. So that's a great example from public speaking. Another one when it comes to leadership and corporate culture. So there's this famous story about a child who asks their mother, "Why do we cut the end off of the roasts before we put it in the oven?" And the mother says, "Well, actually, I don't know. That's the way my mother showed me how to do it. I don't know why we do it. That's just how we do it that way." And so they then went to talk to the grandmother and asked, "Grandma, why do we do it that way?" She said, "Well, the reason is when I was young, we didn't have a very big oven. So the only way we could fit the roast into the oven was to cut the ends off." So here you have an example of where you can use this in the context of people have no idea why they're doing something. They're only doing it because that's the way it's been done. And this story is a great one. There's another couple that you can pull that illustrate this point, but this is a really effective one to illustrate that point. So I really encourage you, start putting together a swipe file. I have a video on using Notion. If this is interesting, actually, if anyone's interested in learning how to use Notion to make a swipe file, put it in the comments below. I'm happy to make a video about that. If you like this video, I think you're really gonna like this one over here. Hopefully you found this helpful, and I look forward to seeing you again sometime soon.